We're hearing from some industries, like in the auto space, that they only have supply for the next 3 to 6 months. So there's going to be some real genuine problems in the supply chain. What other industries are facing these same bottlenecks?
Absolutely. So a few of the key ones we're looking at, in addition to autos, aerospace in particular, tungsten was on our list for a couple of years saying, be prepared, be ready. Just for background, ever since the gallium germanium controls have come out, the number one question for industry, rightfully, has been which minerals are next. And so we face two problems today. One is, of the minerals that have already been targeted, what is most impacted? And second is, what minerals are next and what will become impacted? And so that's where I mentioned the tungsten issue. Where companies have been able to kind of proactively prepare, there's a little bit of margin where many of them are stockpiled, but that is a finite, there's a finite leeway to that. But the other side is, if Beijing gets particularly creative, it has the potential to really disrupt a number of supply chains that might not be fully ready for. I think at this stage, most companies are getting more ahead of the curve and are really preparing proactively. But, aerospace, batteries, vehicles are kind of top of mind. But in addition, and what I personally think is a major motivation behind the targeting of heavy rare earths, and we can talk about that in a moment if of interest, but of the 17 rare earth minerals, Beijing targeted 7 specifically for controls most recently. Now, one of my arguments is that they targeted the heavy rare earths, particularly because they're the most concentrated in national security and defense applications. They're not exclusively used in defense, but they're much more impactful for defense. So things like remote sensing equipment, things of that nature that are much more sensitive than they are for the general commercial industry. And so at this stage, we're getting to a point where NatSec is very much in Beijing's crosshairs.
Okay, we are talking national security, but before I ask about the commission, and of course you're going to be speaking to Congress in a couple of days, I want to ask about the warning that many groups, including Trivium China, have alerted to with regards to these risks about rare earths. This has been ongoing, been voicing out these concerns since late 2023. Why has it come to a head now?
Long and short is, I think, up until 2023, Beijing was very focused, and the U.S., for what it's worth, is very focused on domestic economic recovery. At this stage, though, this is increasingly there are two sides of this. It really started with the tech controls. I think it was really the first flashpoint where the Biden administration decided that Beijing's access to high-end chips, particularly those applicable to military and other purposes, is very risky. And so we sought to cut those off. Beijing took that as a sea change in terms of U.S.-China tensions. Now, since then, there have been many waypoints in this ongoing escalatory conflict. It's not just the U.S. There were, for example, the graphite industry controls, graphite export controls, partly inspired or retaliatory to the EU's investigation of Chinese electric vehicles. Graphite is essential to the batteries that power electric vehicles. So it was a very symbolic as well as materially reciprocal action. But now this has become part of the retaliatory playbook. Now that current President Trump of the U.S. has imposed this sweeping and very directly escalatory tariff regime, Beijing really has had to come up with a creative suite, a package of retaliatory measures. And that includes company sanctions and other measures that are frankly less materially impactful and more politically salient as bargaining chips. But minerals now are one of the most material sources of leverage that Beijing has. And that is why we effectively see them using it.
And of course, so will bring me to my next question. And you're going to be delivering testimony before the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission, and that happens on Thursday, April the 24th. What will be your main message to lawmakers when you're there?
Two messages. One is that Beijing is in a comparatively defensive position. There is effectively the opportunity for the U.S. to decide what risks is it willing to take in terms of China's control over key supply chains versus the opportunity of, again, from the White House's perspective, of attacking the trade deficit issue through tariffs and other measures. There is a direct trade-off. Beijing will respond. It is not going to escalate on its own terms, but it will respond very proportionally. And so I think in many ways, the ball is in DC's court in that particular regard. The second point is as the US looks to diversify the risk, and it's true that there are risks of having any supply chain overly concentrated in any given country, even if there were not a massive geopolitical risk issue going on, and of course there is, so it just doubles down the issue. There is this interest in diversifying supply chains, and right now the discourse in DC is, do we onshore everything or something else? And the answer is something else. My main message in terms of supply chain diversification is that the US and other countries, including liberalized markets, have among them a very robust set of geological resources, technical skills, and capital waiting to be deployed for this type of mineral investment. The US alone does not have all those things, and it should not be going it alone. My main message is to partner where it can. Onshore where you can, certainly, I understand the political will behind that, but friendshore where it must, and the answer is it must in many, many cases. That is the pathway to diversification and true risk mitigation.